Every day, something dramatic happens in the Caribbean that affects our lives. We'll give you the details. We'll give you the facts on Caribbean Perspective with Eddie Frederick. Host Eddie Frederick.
So glad you can join us. 31st August 1962 to 31st August 2022. Trinidad and Tobago turns 60 with major celebrations planned. This story takes the lead in today's edition of Caribbean Perspective for Monday 29th August 2022. Details when we return.
The hurricane season is now upon us, so we as Caribbean people need to remember to think safety and be prepared. Avoid venturing outside during a storm or hurricane, especially if there are strong winds. Rooftops and other debris are often blown about and can cause great damage.
Welcome back. On August 31st, 1962, Dr. Eric Eustace Williams became the first Prime Minister of the independent nation of Trinidad and Tobago. Karen Cozier-Phillip of TTT News has more.
On February 26, 1970, the relatively new People's National Movement government faced its first challenge to the democratic process.
The 1970 Black Power uprising, which I think was the first major post-independence social upheaval.
20 years later, on July 27, 1990, Prime Minister, the late Arthur Napoleon Raymond Robinson, would also face a threat to the country's stability by the Jamaat al-Muslimin.
The country survived, going through a very, very difficult period and never having encountered that kind of attack on the state and surviving over that course of events.
Mr. Robinson also served as president of the Twin Island Nation from March 1997 to March 2003. He was called upon to settle the 1818 tie between the United National Congress and the People's National Movement in the elections of December 10, 2001.
But that period from December 24th, 2001, when Mr. Manning was announced as Prime Minister, following the election of the 10th of December, up to the period of the dissolution around the 28th of August, 2002, that was a very difficult period.
Despite facing these challenges, Professor Ghani believes Trinidad and Tobago's democratic foundation is one that is quite solid, as there have been 6 changes of power in 6 decades. But there's one fundamental issue regarding Tobago which needs to be settled.
Tobago is not seeking secession, it's seeking self-government, and I think that that's where the difference lies. And in granting self-government, I think it's something that requires a certain amount of appreciation of the fact that Tobago does have a separate political history and political dynamic from Trinidad.
Professor Ghani believes as Trinidad and Tobago goes forward for the next 60 years, the electoral process is one where people can have confidence. But the judicial process is an area that needs a tremendous amount of attention and concern at this time. I'm Karen Cozier-Phillip for TTT News.
Still from Port of Spain, in anticipation of the government's upcoming fiscal plan, the Confederation of Regional Business Chambers is calling for further incentives for the SME sector. The CRBC is also concerned that if measures aren't taken to reduce inflation, it would spell trouble for the economy. TV6's Alicia Boucher has the details.
Chairman of the Confederation of Regional Business Chambers, Vivek Charan, fears that if inflation continues as is, the country would enter a recession. He says while there is some economic growth being experienced, he is attributing this to higher energy prices brought on by the Russia-Ukraine war. And in his words, TNT isn't there yet, not because of policy, but because of Putin.
Outside of the energy sector, we're not seeing that level of growth, we're not seeing that level of commercial activity in the private sector. So in the private sector, when we look at things like exports, or exports really climbing, when we look at things as within the SME sector, is the SME sector really growing? And the answer to that is no. The primary concern is the fact that inflation can lead inexorably to a recession. Do we want to return to a recession?
Charon says with shipping costs sky high and travel for business to China subjected to COVID-19 quarantine measures among other obstacles, the CRBC is calling on the government to consider duty reform.
So if it is that incomes of individuals and incomes of workers cannot increase, and it's very difficult to increase that at the moment, if the level of commercial activity within the private sector has not peaked or is not growing, then the only other thing we can do, if we can't control the inflationary pressures on the outside, is how do we make things affordable on the inside? And what can we do on the inside? The only thing I can see that is left is let us look at the duty structures and temporarily over a period of time, let us create create a valve to let off some of that steam with all that inflationary pressure that is being built up on the inside.
CRBC coordinator Jai Shima Leeladhar Singh says small and medium enterprises seriously need some relief, especially now that the country is earning more revenue from energy prices.
I certainly believe that the government can look at the whole issue of taxation regarding the SMEs, and government need to present some type of relief to the SMEs if they are continuing their operations or more or less expanding their operations, because they are very burdened by these taxation payments. You have to make your statutory payments. That is critical. But they are very much burdened by these tax payments. And maybe a very small window of a tax holiday can work at this particular point in time.
The CRBC is suggesting boosting the construction sector. Leeladhar Singh says there is a large labor pool, and once they are given more spending power, it would augur well for economic confidence building. Alicia Boucher, TV6 News.
You're listening to Caribbean Perspective with Eddie Frederick. Jamaicans are dealing with mental health issues in this post-pandemic period. Dr. Jeffrey Walcott explains in this Shamila Pullin TVJ News report.
Summer is a time of the year when persons have the freedom to engage in fun activities with family and friends. But consultant psychiatrist Dr. Jeffrey Walcott says this summer may not be like others. He says with Jamaica coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic, there are economic issues and general unease following the announcement that the country recorded its first monkeypox case.
Persons are under psychological stress, and so it's a difficult time, and that can in fact cause people to end up with some form of anxiety, increased depressive symptoms, and of course, I'll never forget, post-traumatic stress disorder, because we've been traumatized by going through this pandemic for 2 years. And now with this particular trigger of a new infection on the horizon, a lot of persons might find that they are having symptoms of PTSD.
Therefore, it is important to recognize when you're having a problem early and seek help quickly.
Some of the things that you can use to tell whether or not something is happening, basic changes in the way you behave, or the way you're doing things. Sleep is one of the earliest symptoms that you can actually use to tell that something is happening both physically or psychiatrically or psychologically. Because once your sleep pattern changes, it means that there's something happening. And if it persists for over a week or 2 weeks, then it may be a sign, an early sign, that you need to actually check out what's going on.
The psychiatrist is also encouraging persons to take care of their mental health by also eating healthy and staying physically active.
Exercise really deals with a lot of physical and mental challenges. Exercise has been shown to be as effective as medication in dealing with depressive symptoms, and it's not something like Olympic training. Really, what we require is probably 30 to 45 minutes of walking a day. The consistency is more important than the intensity.
With your health report, I'm Shamila Pullin wishing you good health.
International investors say the region must look to new sectors to survive and stop putting all their eggs in the tourism basket. Details in this Barbados Today news item.
Stop putting all your eggs in the tourism basket. Today, the principals of Upturn Funds Caribbean advise regional governments it's time to diversify their economies if they want to survive. At the opening of the venture capital firm's inaugural investment summit this morning, UFC co-founder Raphael De Angelis said big opportunities await the region.
of all the projects that you have, the first one, and Mark Green participation as well, we're very thankful, can be a game changer for the region, which is the Maritime Project. Without logistics integration, without transportation infrastructure developed for peoples and cargoes and goods, there is no future in the Caribbean. Tourism, it's something that no longer works in this region, and there is way better markets and more fit to be a more aggressive competitor in the tourism arena than many countries in the Caribbean. But we know that if we integrate the region, bring the region closer together, we have a shot here and actually create economic prosperity in a level never seen before. And we base this not only on the fact that we want to integrate. No, we actually went through many studies in many different regions around the world to show the average growth that integration can generate.
His counterpart, Chief Executive Officer of UFC, Ambassador Dr. Andre Thomas, also suggested it's time the region spread its wings, as he highlighted the impact of international events on tourism.
So when you look at the Caribbean, you realize that one of our major economic pillars, which is tourism, it's very clear how susceptible it is in our current world. And in our current world, with climate change, with geopolitical conflicts, and the integration of the world in which a crisis in one country in Asia or say Europe can trigger a chain reaction around the world that can affect people's inclination to travel, then our vulnerability is significant.
Mark Green, a U.S. official who also addressed the summit, warns the region to be wary of its ties with China.
Green warned countries that accepting investment opportunities from economic powerhouse China comes at a price. His comments come amid rising tensions between U.S. President Joe Biden and his Chinese counterpart as a Beijing invasion of Taiwan looms.
What's good for the United States is good for the Caribbean. What's good for the Caribbean is good for the United States. Unfortunately, for too long, U.S. foreign policy has largely ignored our neighbors in the Western Hemisphere, particularly the Caribbean. And we've seen the detrimental effects of that detachment. From China's debt trap diplomacy to Russia's extensive disinformation campaigns, Iran's funding of terrorism, to Taiwan's growing diplomatic isolation, to rising instability and surging immigration at our southern border. America's aloofness towards the Western Hemisphere has created a vacuum, and that vacuum has rapidly been filled mainly by Russia and China. And unlike the United States, which seeks mutually beneficial relationships, Russia and China care about only themselves.
As demands for regional travel grow, Antigua and Barbuda is hoping the cash-strapped airline Liat can capitalize on the market and become profitable once more.
Speaking at a recent post-cabinet media briefing, Information Minister Melford Nicholas revealed that the government, which is a major shareholder in Liat, took a decision to scale up operations at the airline. Currently, Liat has 3 ATR 42-600s in its fleet, and they carry passengers to destinations including Antigua, St. Martin, Dominica, Barbados, and Grenada. He said, and I quote, "We are at a stage where Liat 1974 Limited has continued to operate. Of course, they are encumbered by the limited number of aircraft, so the intention is to scale up the operations to ensure we can have at least 2 more aircraft available on wet leases for the continuing operation." He added, "It is more than likely that a new format of Liat 2020 would be the institution that takes on the wet leases and make them available to Liat 1974 until we have completed the conversion of Liat 2020. Nicholas noted that Antigua and Barbuda has the support of regional leaders, particularly those in the Eastern Caribbean, who have been clamoring for greater connectivity in the sub-region.
Hubbard is once again innovating the way you shop with its new online store, providing 24-hour shopping convenience. You can shop now for appliances, hardware, houseware, building material, and more. Free delivery island-wide. Start shopping now at hubbardshardware.gd. Safe, convenient, reliable.
I am Eddie Frederick. This has been Caribbean Perspective, a whole new approach to highlighting developments in the Caribbean. In the meantime, please continue to log on to CaribbeanPerspective.com for more daily news and more.